Hi, everyone. This is Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're having a very interesting show tonight. And thanks for joining me. And we had quite an interesting show last night, so this is turning out to be a fascinating week. And tonight we have Judge Anna von Reitz, as well as, we have Robert Horton, and we're also hoping that Scott Bennett will be able to join us, but at the moment it doesn't look like he is here. So unfortunately, Russell J. Gould is declining to join us, and we're not even sure why, but something to do with objecting to the use of language in terms of, I guess, the title of Anna von Reitz. So that's maybe something that Robert Horton can explain to you. At any rate, we have two wonderful guests, and so we're going to continue the roundtable discussion. We're calling it We the People, because it is about what's going on here on planet Earth and what matters to Americans and or should matter. And so at this moment, what I'm going to do is briefly read a statement that I got from Robert just before we started here. So if you'll bear with me, and hope that, so basically we're talking about the American common law courts have been quietly shut down by a foreign and domestic enemy, and the codes and statutes of those courts are what the people are being captured and extorted under. They are not laws of the land, but rather they are laws of the sea, and they are being exercised in violation of their jurisdiction. Where the law of the sea has no jurisdiction on land yet, the roads that we drive our cars on are referred to as inland waterways. And he says it's all fraud. So David Wynn Miller is someone I interviewed quite a long time ago, but he is, my interview with him is on my Project Camelot YouTube channel if you're interested. We are going to be covering, I believe, some of the same territory that he covers, but perhaps from some different viewpoints. So that's where we're going tonight, and I want to welcome both my guests. And let's see, why don't we start with Robert Horton? Perhaps you can give us a little bit more of a background and an introduction to what we'll be discussing.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and thank you, Carrie, for having me on the show. I'm sorry, and I'd like to apologize to everyone as well. We expected to have Russell J. Gould on here, and Russell J. Gould is David Wynn Miller's senior partner. And Russell J. Gould is the actual Postmaster General here for the United States, as well as Comptroller of the Global Currency. He's done a great deal of many things here on this planet that only he can disclose and articulate to you, because it's quite a list. Other than that, I was working with him and Judge David Wynn Miller to find someone who could articulate the history of the fraud, the banking fraud being committed against the United States of America here that they were aware of before they moved and had to move on the fly to do what they had done. And like I said, Russell was going to cover all that, but we eventually ran across Anna von Reitz and what she was doing. And we were alerted to that by some postings that she had filed with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Provost Marshal, the U.S. Marshal, the FBI, et cetera, a host of many other agencies. Just trickled down through. And so I made direct contact with her, asked her to validate and verify that she was indeed a judge. She dispensed with me over the phone for a good solid hour. And I was inclined to agree that she was a judge at the common law level. And I told her to just keep going. We wanted to hear more. Please continue with your work, and best of luck to her. And so she continued to file with those agencies, and the history she's divulged and the banking fraud that has been uncovered has been tremendous. Her effort has been tremendous. It's been well received. And with that, I'll let you go ahead and we can hand it off to her.
Okay, and let me just say that there is some audio interference happening in the background. So if either of you are having some distraction going on with moving things around or other people in your midst, if you could mute yourself when you're not talking, that will help any distraction going on audio-wise. So welcome, Anna, and it's lovely to have you. Can you please introduce yourself and then give yourself some background? I did post on to my front page of projectcamelotportal.com a statement by you, so anyone who is watching this is able to go over there and take a look at the statement. Some people will be very well familiar with who you are and your work, which I think is highly respected all over the world. But why don't you, as I say, introduce yourself?
All right. Well, there are some questions that need to be answered. I actually function in two roles, and as an American common law justice, which is the name that judges have under common law, and also as a judge under Article 10. Now, this is a little bit confusing to people because they don't really understand the structure of the government that our forefathers left us. And as a result, they haven't operated their government as it's meant to be operated, and have instead allowed other parties to come in and usurp positions and take charge of situations that should never have been entrusted to foreign interests, especially foreign commercial interests. So you can call me Justice Anna von Reitz when you are referring to me in my capacity as an elected American common law justice, or you can call me Judge Anna von Reitz when I'm functioning under Article 10, which is a federal international capacity. And basically, we have been forced to undertake work in both of these venues because there aren't that many people who are educated and ready to be able to step into those positions who are not bar association attorneys. We are accumulating a greater number of retired judges and individuals who, for one reason or another, have seen the light and decided that the bar association is not a organization they want to belong to. And so we are picking up a considerable number of attorneys and retired judges who are working for the American common law court system. We're also training quite a number of people to take up the duties of American common law justices. It should be understood that American common law is a land jurisdiction venue of the law, and it's a very different role than the typical judge that we think of or that we have observed in courtrooms to date. In American common law, the justice has a role more like a moderator. They bring forward rules for evidence. They establish a fair playing field for people to bring forward their points. They will bring forward historical information, but they don't tell the jury what to do. In an American common law court, the jury is king, and the judge is simply there to moderate the proceedings according to rule and to provide a fair atmosphere for the presentation of information. And the jury is the one who decides both the facts and the law. Now, what I mean by that is that under American common law, the jury gets to decide whether the law is fair or right and has the power of jury nullification, which is the primary means by which Americans traditionally kept control of out-of-control state and federal legislatures. An American common law jury can strike down any law that it deems unfair or unworkable or unsatisfactory in any way. So as a result, the traditional system that we are heir to had a means of weeding out laws that were fanciful or impractical or unfair. It acted as a sort of pruning mechanism on the legislative branch of the government. And that's the way it's intended to work. And I suggest that everybody who needs verification or wants to see how this works or is supposed to work should look up jury nullification for their own interest. Now, those of us that are working as common law justices, as I say, are more moderators than directors. We don't tell the jury what to think. We don't tell the jury how to find. We don't dictate to the jury what they can consider as evidence. And we make a level effort to bring forward facts for their consideration. So it's a very different atmosphere and a very different proceeding from the typical administrative or admiralty court, where judges basically tell juries when to sit up and when to sit down and what to do and how to think and what they consider and what they cannot consider. Very different attitude toward the entire proceeding. In an American common law court, the defendant is considered innocent until proven guilty. In an admiralty court, this is exactly reversed, and the one who is accused is considered guilty until proven innocent. These are realities of the law and the way the law works in different jurisdictions. And until people start to understand what the kind of law that they're supposed to have versus the kind of law that they have had access to, it's very difficult to put across to them how it is that you can have two separate forms of law. You can have people operating under all these different venues, and they can all be correct. But a good deal of it has to do with the fact that we have been mischaracterized as citizens. And the fundamental fact is that the American common law is owed to American state nationals, whereas U.S. citizens, United States citizens, or citizens of the United States are only, they only have access to the federal court system, and that's all international law, either maritime, admiralty, or administrative courts, which are just courts that deal with the internal affairs of the government corporations, an administrative tribunal for employees or officers or dependents of the federal government corporations. I wish that I could make this simpler, but if you look at the Constitution, you'll see that there are two kinds of federal courts that are actually referenced in the document. One of them is an administrative court, and one of them is a admiralty court. And these are all international jurisdiction courts. The reason being that the People's Court, which was well established and had been functioning for 400 years, or has functioned for 400 years on this continent, was assumed and taken for granted. It was the primary court. it was operating under the American common law, the law of the land, and everybody at the time that the Constitution was written took that for granted as the court system. The federal court system was a specialty court system dealing in international law, specifically in admiralty and maritime law, and in its own peculiar administrative functions. So for the people that framed the Constitution, there wasn't even a question in their minds that there was an American common law court system and that it was the people's court system, and that there was, as they said in the document, the one people's court. And we have today been eroded to such an extent that we have to tell people their own history and their own history of the court system and the venue that they're owed, because it has been so far corrupted and eroded by the misuse and abuse of what are called executive tribunals in courts. Now, these are another animal which came about during the Civil War and just after the Civil War. And it's responsible for the worst abuses of the carpetbaggers. What happened is that at the end of the Civil War, the northern states were in bankruptcy, and the southern states were under military occupation and in a state of ruin. So we had no competent government. We were under the trusteeship of foreign entities, banks, and clergy. And as a result, immediately after the armistice at Appomattox, the Congress, which was operating without any true granted authority, created a kind of law that is sometimes called executive or administrative executive common law or martial common law, in which military commanders that were in charge of 10 different districts, federal districts that comprised the defeated southern states, were given the ability to appoint basically their friends, relatives, or anyone that they thought was competent to serve as a judge in these executive administrative courts. They basically fleeced everyone silly. They accused everyone of being a rebel, and the point of these courts was to suppress and punish rebels. So it became an excuse to plunder and pillage people. And that's why the carpetbagger era was such a dark chapter in our history. It's continued to be a dark chapter because these courts, which are military common law tribunals, have set up and have been used as a means to plunder and pillage the American people. And we have not been able or wise enough or aware enough to realize that these are not our courts. These are not the courts that we are owed.
Okay, Anna, thank you. Very eloquent. I wonder if I can ask you, that being the case, what is the remedy?
The remedy is already in place. It was decided in 1866. It's a Supreme Court case called Milligan Ex Parte, and it decided very firmly and simply that wherever the American common law courts are up and operating, the military, quasi-military executive tribunals are to shut down. They can only be used when the American common law courts are not functioning. So basically, it's our own fault. We've needed all these years to get busy and reestablish and set up and operate our own American common law courts. And then it is already decided and on the books that the federal organizations need to withdraw and basically vacate our position and our property, our courts, our system, which belongs to the people of this country.
Okay, then because people would ask, since it hasn't been done, there must be more than one reason why it hasn't been done. In other words, a lack of knowledge doesn't seem to be sufficient to mean, that it simply hasn't been done. Usually there are people like yourself and others who will know what needs to be done and attempt to carry it out. I would assume there's some preventative measures being taken to make sure that this doesn't happen. And so what is the alternative in the face of that?
Well, really, the federal government, the federal corporation, knows its role and knows its role very well. We're the ones that have let the ball drop. And the missing link here is the Bar Association. Back in 1809, I believe, no, 1810, the final ratification of the original 13th Amendment took place. And basically, what this was a clarification amendment that referred to an earlier provision that was written into the original Constitution, barring basically conflict of loyalties between governments, such that no one could hold a title or an office that was granted by a foreign nation or foreign government. And at that point, the so-called Titles of Nobility Amendment came into effect, and it affected, for the first time, members of the bar associations. So basically, they were prohibited from holding any public office in our government. And it was because the people that were dealing with this question at the time felt that they were in a conflict of interest scenario, because they were basically holding their professional titles from the King of England, and not therefore presumed to be working for the American government. So the missing link has been the Bar Association all along. There are lawyers who know this information as well or better than I do, but they don't step forward and do anything about it because they would lose their jobs. They would lose their roles and their prestige and all that they have worked and fought for and that they depend upon for their families to make a living. If they were to stand up and say, okay, well, this is the way it is, and go with the Constitution as it currently stands and remains. Because once that amendment was made to the actual Constitution, it became the law of the land. And so according to the law of the land, as it is actually written and as it remains, no bar association attorney holding a title of Esquire or higher office is allowed to hold any kind of public office in our government at all. And that's the way it's been since the early 1800s.
But is that actually being followed? Because aren't several people lawyers? In fact, isn't Hillary Clinton herself a lawyer?
Most of the people who are involved in the federal corporate government at this point are lawyers. And there is no prohibition against them holding any private office in a corporation, nor is there any prohibition against them holding an office in their own government. What part of the problem is that the federal organization has always been a foreign entity with respect to us. So it has its own identity as a nation. The federal corporation and the federal government that we think of is actually composed of British subjects. And we first see this in the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War, called the Definitive Treaty of Paris, 1783. You have two populations on this continent at that point. You have what are called the free, sovereign, and independent people of the United States. That's us. And you also have the inhabitants, who are British subjects, who are here for the purpose of providing essential governmental services. And you will see that in Article 4 of the Constitution. So you have two separate nations, two separate populations, and they've always been here, cheek and jowl together. One British subjects and one American state nationals, people who are born on the land of the individual 50 nation states, as Texans, Ohioans, Virginians, and so on. So you have these two populations, you have these two coexisting nations, and they operate under different forms of government. The British subjects, known as citizens of the United States or United States citizens, operate under a democracy. The state nationals, the people who are owed the land jurisdiction of this entire country, operate under a Republican form of government. And then last but not least, we have what are called municipal citizens, and they operate under an oligarchy formed by the Congress. If you look at, I believe it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, you'll see that the Congress was given the absolute plenary right to establish a government for the District of Columbia and to run that government however they saw fit. So they established a separate government for the District of Columbia, and they've ruled over it as plenary oligarchs. They also then, having established a government for the District of Columbia, set up another separate government for the city of Washington, D.C., a municipal government, a city-state government like ancient Athens or Sparta, within the District of Columbia. So you have a municipal government and a municipal corporation that operates Washington, D.C., which has its own laws and its own turf. And then you have also the District of Columbia itself, which has its own corporation and its own democratic government. That's why you always hear them talking about, spreading democracy, and it's great to be living in a democratic society and so on and so forth. But that is not our society. Our society is a republic. It always has been. So
okay, but and I appreciate this line of thought. But the question, of course, is, and I think many people will ask this question, that what you're doing is describing the state of affairs that we find ourselves in. And I realize that that information is valuable. But I think a lot of people would like to know, how do they get out of the situation that they're in? And my understanding is that the military is not in essence reporting to the people in this case, but they are, a law unto themselves, it appears, but also working for, the corporation. I'm not even sure. But the point being is, in other words, we deal with what is in essence taken for granted, as you call it, and the way the police throw people in jail under certain laws, they get convicted and they're sentenced, et cetera, et cetera. So people who don't want to go to jail basically try to toe the line in terms of following the laws that even if they're illegal, and even if they shouldn't pertain to us because they're laws of the sea and not the land, they still are, in essence, enforced by our quote unquote law enforcement, etc. So how, I wonder, you have this knowledge, so does Russell J. Gould. In fact, in spite of the fact that he doesn't want to speak in public at the moment, appears. And David Wynn Miller, who is quite a public speaker, as I recall. Nonetheless, what is the solution? Because I'm sure you're a practical person, as we all are, in terms of everyday life. And I'm sure you want to see this put into effect. So how do you deal with what is, in essence, a strong arm government that is forcing you to live according to their law?
Well, they're in violation of international law if they try to strong arm anyone's declaration of a political status.
But they do that all the time.
Well, do they? Or are we simply being ineffective and not properly taking the steps necessary to declare our political status and stick by it? I think that in the cases that I'm aware of, the federal government has been very strict and clean in observing the difference between American state nationals and any form of federal citizen. The problem has been that American state nationals haven't realized the difference. And so they have readily identified themselves as U.S. citizens of some form, and they have then come under federal jurisdiction. The problem, as I see it, has been a combination of self-interest on the part of federal corporations and their state franchises, and general ignorance on the part of the people and the population. They have conspired to define all of us, almost at birth, as United States citizens, which places you firmly under federal jurisdiction and makes you basically chattel back in the debts of the federal corporations. So they have a motive to do this. They have a motive to come around and entrap and enslave everyone that they can, because that's how they make their money. However, you have a completely defensible right, and they have signed on to the accords that require this of them, to declare your actual status, your actual political status, and to stand by it. So
okay, well, I actually know someone who has attempted to do this, and he was Sean David Morton. I'm not sure if you know who he is, and other people as well, but they have actually ended up under arrest, being fined by the SEC, being brought up on charges that had nothing to do with what they were trying to defend, and so on and so forth. In other words, I guess in essence, what we have are crooked judges and judges that are working for the corporation and under no desire to see, the American people be free in any way, shape, or form. So what we're talking about is, and I kind of went through this with David Wynn Miller, but if it's so difficult for the average person to learn all of these rules and ways of behavior that would then overturn the system in their favor. And let me tell you that Sean David Morton has, I guess, something like a photographic memory. And he is a person who has gone into court a number of times, won his cases using this line of reasoning that you're referring to. But even he, at a certain point, was not able to proceed that far. And ultimately, one of the most recent things, he was arrested when he got off a ship on the docks, after a conference. And so what I have to say is that the problem is, you're speaking of supposed ignorance on the part of the people. And it's often the case in these kinds of situations to lay the fault on the side of the people, when in reality the fault lays actually on the other side of the equation. And I'm not so sure that the solution is to learn a lot of jargon and be able to stand up in court and spout it off to the satisfaction of the judge. In other words, this is highly problematic, and many people have actually lost the cases when they've tried to do this. So we kind of need a different solution to this problem. You obviously are very well familiar with the problem again, but we need a solution. Now, I've also been told that sheriffs, I believe I was told sheriffs, have the ability to turn things around, to put people in jail who are misusing the law, and that includes bankers, etc. But they never exercise that right. And that's also a problem. Are you aware of that?
I'm very much aware of it. It's all part of the intense focus on American common law and resurrecting and restoring the American common law courts. You have to realize that there are peacekeepers who operate on the land jurisdiction, and there are law enforcement officers who operate in the international jurisdiction of the sea. And when all of the states and counties decided to incorporate themselves as franchises of the federal corporation back in the 50s and 60s, all of our sheriffs de facto became law enforcement agents. They became responsible for enforcing codes and statutes and regulations instead of enforcers of the public law. That is, they ceased to operate as peacekeepers and ceased enforcing the public law, including the organic law and the United States statutes at large, because that was no longer their job. That was no longer what they were being paid to do. Now, Sheriff Richard Mack and another man named Prins brought suit in the United States Supreme Court, Mack versus Prins versus Mack and Prins versus United States of America, USA. And the upshot of that decision was that sheriffs who are being paid by corporate franchises could indeed opt to enforce the public and organic law at their volition. So even though all of these organizations that they work for incorporated as franchises of the federal corporation, just like Dairy Queen franchises, they did win their point that they could also act to enforce the public law. Whether or not they do so is a matter of their personal choice, whether they are going to honor their oath or not. I've seen an awful lot of crooked judges. I've seen an even greater number of just absolutely ignorant judges, and I have seen an even greater number of ignorant law enforcement personnel who are actually being put in a very untenable position because they are not trained in the law, and yet they are supposed to be enforcing the law. So we have a very dire situation, and the weak link in the situation is the understanding of law enforcement and military personnel with regard to what their actual duty and what they're actually being paid for and by whom. And until we sort this out and make it crystal clear to them, it's going to continue to be a problem. And those who are acting as the middlemen, the corporate managers, are going to continue to weasel around and try to get an advantage for themselves and for their corporate bosses at the expense of the people that they're supposed to be serving.
Okay, so at this time we have an American election, supposedly, and a lot of people are very concerned about the vote, et cetera, et cetera. What is your viewpoint of this situation?
I haven't voted in a United States election in many years because if you read the Constitution that they published for their corporation back in 1868, you'll see that it's unlawful for us to do so. We were disenfranchised. American state nationals cannot vote in federal elections, period. It's against their law. So, people ask me about Trump versus Hillary. I take the attitude that they are the president of a corporation. It's a private governmental services corporation, and they're under contract to me, to my state, to provide services. It doesn't really matter to me who mows my grass or who is responsible for my snow removal, as long as they do the job and do it for a reasonable price. And that is the relationship that I, as an American state national, have with the federal contractors. They've got a job to do. I'm paying them to do it. They're obligated to protect me and to provide these essential governmental services, just as it says under Article 4 of the Constitution. And if they don't provide those services, if they harm me, if they in any way create problems for me, it's of no interest to me what they call themselves or what kind of organization they have. What matters to me as a consumer of their services is, do they do a good job? And do they do it for a rational price? It's just like consumerism of any other kind. We are consuming governmental services that are provided by these rascals. And that's, there's nothing at all mysterious about the role of the military or the police in any of this. They too are subcontractors who are under contract to provide services to the actual states and people of this country. We are the ones who, with our sweat and labor and our natural resources, provide the wherewithal to employ them. And if they are being misdirected, and if their power to provide service is being misapplied, then the problem is with the administrators and executives that are giving them the wrong instructions. And it is also with us for failing to enforce our end of the deal.
Okay, so at this time, however, we do have an election that many people will be voting in and believing that that's their so-called American duty and right and so on and so forth. My point of view is that this country is not a democracy, and it's run by a secret government that is in essence also run and managed in essence by the secret space program which is run by the British and Americans together, as well as the Russians and some other individuals and countries such as France and Germany. But I think that this election is still, it's going on as planned. So in your own life, you haven't voted, but you must, I'm not sure about your history in terms of the cases that you listen to and the judgments that you pass. Are you an active judge at this time, or is this something that you are unable to practice?
Judges in the American common law system are limited to land jurisdiction. So you have a prescribed geographical area that you service, and there is no interplay between that area and other areas. For example, if you're a county judge, your county is your service area, and you don't practice outside of it. If you're a state judge, then your service area is the entire state, and so on. And this is just a matter of being elected by the people who are operating as American state nationals in that state. For example, Alaskans. Alaskans elect their judges. And that's basically just a matter that within the American common law system, you get to choose who you trust or who you want to be a judge for your community. And so various people step up and offer to do the service. And those who wish to receive that service or have need of it come forward and agree by contract, basically. They consent to the American common law system, and they consent to have me serve as the justice in their situation. It's a service.
So you are a state judge?
Yes, I want you to pay very close attention. There's the Alaska state, and there's the state of Alaska. The word of means without. So when you say state of Alaska, you're saying state without Alaska. When you say Alaska state, you're referring to the actual, factual, material state, the state that people live and breathe in. When you say state of Alaska, you're talking about the corporate inchoate jurisdiction of the federales and of the federal state of states. If you look in the Uniform Commercial Code, which all the states adopted when they incorporated as franchises of the federal government back in the 50s and 60s, you will see in the definitions section, state of states. That's what we have operating here, just like Dairy Queen franchises. These are states of state. So we have the actual state, which is the land jurisdiction, the state where the people live, okay? That's the Alaska state or the Florida state or the Texas state. And then you have the state ofs. You have the state of Texas, styled as upper and lowercase. You have the state of Texas styled in all capital letters. Each one of these things is different. You've got two states that are operating in international jurisdiction, one of which is operated by the United States of America Incorporated, District of Columbia, as a democracy, and one which is operated as a municipal state of state. So you've got all these different entities out there that are operating in different capacities and in different jurisdictions. You have to be able to figure out which one you are and where you fit in all of this.
Okay, well, I think, it sounds like if humans are really intelligent, then they would simplify the matter rather than making it more complex for themselves and for others, so that there would be less confusion. It's kind of like the Tower of Babel, everyone speaking a different language and no one understanding each other. So in the end, can you talk about Russell J. Gould, what he does, why he didn't show up, and what that means?
I haven't got a clue why Russell didn't show up.
Okay.
And I don't have any idea why he would have any problem other than the fact that in American common law, I'm called a justice, and under Article 10, I'm called a judge. And perhaps he was objecting to the fact that no distinction had been made. On my side of it, I have some questions that I would like to ask Russell. And so far that hasn't been possible. But I would like to ask him about the position of Postmaster General, which in my understanding didn't even come into existence until after the Civil War. And I would like to ask him about his position as comptroller of global currency, because while I have been an advocate of global currency for many years, I'm not aware of there being a true global currency. One of the problems that we have is that there are really only two forms of value that we use in any kind of trade or commerce on this planet. One is labor, and the other is natural resources and the commodities we develop out of those resources.
Gold.
Well, gold is a commodity. Silver is a commodity. Corn is a commodity. These are all things that, taken together, have a store of value associated with them. So, in reality, any kind of system that just specifically uses a symbolic representation of value that does not allow for the value of other commodities has a tendency to be manipulated and to suffer from inelasticity, is what it's called. Because at a certain point, there's never enough of whatever the standard commodities are. It always creates problems, and it's always somehow dishonest. The honest, in my opinion, the honest route out of that situation is for everyone to bring their commodities to the table and to be able to trade on a global scale with a global currency. A currency that was truly representative of all commodities and all labor, would intrinsically be fair, and it would be elastic, and it would be a system that would work far better than what we've had in the past, simply because you would no longer be subject to hoarding and manipulation and all the other problems that have occurred in different monetary systems that we've tried. I guess the way to explain that is like a commodity market. If you're a producer of a commodity like oil or pork bellies or sorghum or soybeans, you can self-insure by selling forward all or a portion of your crop at a specific price. And so for a producer, a commodity market works. You have a advantage as a producer, and you can use the market to provide for yourself and your family in a rational manner. But if you are someone who is not a producer, who's forced to interact with the commodity market, you're at a significant disadvantage. You're pretty much at the mercy of however the producers want to manipulate or sell off or sell into that market. So that's what happens when you have a commodity asset-based system. And the situation, as you can see, with using commercial paper as legal tender instead has its own set of problems. So I have advocated a global currency for at least 10 years, and I'm fascinated that Russell Gould is claiming to be comptroller of global currency when I'm not aware that there is a global currency.
Okay. Let me interject right here.
All right. Yes. So this is Robert Horton, just to remind everyone, and thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Can I ask you if you're aware of the empire of the 3 city-states, Anna?
Actually, I'm aware of the empire of the 4 city-states, and I'm the one who brought it forward to a lot of public attention. It includes the Holy See, or more recently, its management branch, the Vatican, in Vatican City. It includes the inner city of London. It includes Washington, D.C. And just for reference, it also includes the United Nations, which operates as a separate city-state on our shores in the state of New York.
Well, it's my understanding that the empire of the three city-states is ran by the 13 banking families, and that is what Russell J. Gould went in and took down. He disqualified the grammar they're using, just like you had disclosed earlier when you said "of" is used to be a no. So the education, the lack of education actually is taking place, it hasn't taken place actually. So the lack of education in our educational system is responsible for this. And the fact that we're being duped, the people are being duped, the police departments are being duped. For all intents and purposes, these guys have the best of intentions when they go out there to protect and serve, but they're uneducated in these things. And there's nothing more than a high school education behind them. This is how we're suffering at the hands of this stuff. Well, Russell went in and himself and David Miller went in and disqualified all the grammar, therefore disqualified all the contracts, all the banking, and they took down the three city-states. And that's when Russell legged in here. Of course, he legged in globally as the Universal Postmaster General, took down the entire
well, let me just stop you right there and ask you what you mean by took down. Exactly what exactly transpired when he took down? Because to my way of thinking, the fact that he changed some grammar doesn't change anything.
Well, it had to do with fraud. They're utilizing language in a fraudulent manner, and that fraudulent manner isn't being legally conveyed. So it's a fraud against everybody, therefore. So when they went in and they made the correction, they had incidentally at the time broken the mathematical interface between math and grammar, and they filed that globally with everybody and went around and let everybody know what had just happened. They were pulled over at that point by the entire global international intelligence community. Russ was questioned for about 9 months, and they found him to be correct in every manner. He was let back go on the streets. He has placed everything into a quantum location. And what I mean by that is the mathematical interface on grammar was termed or dubbed the quantum correction on grammar, and that entire system was used to constitute an entirely new global government. So Russell, for all intents and purposes, like I said earlier, has basically taken away the Admiralty and Maritime Law of the Sea jurisdiction from those three city-states and captured them to a quantum location and reconstituted everything in quantum using grammar correctly. And when he did that, he separated himself as a sovereign in the United States for a World Corporation, where he and Dave reign as the corporate heads of that nation, legged in here as postmaster generals for this country. So
okay, well,
they assume the debt at that point that the $17 trillion debt's been assumed.
But who's going to acknowledge this?
That's been acknowledged by everybody. The bad thing is that when Russell and Dave had done this, they failed to inform the rest of the people of the world at the basic level. So nobody knows who they are or what they've done. And that's where Anna had come in. We brought Anna in because she was disclosing all this fraud from the ground up to alert the people, hey, here's a fraud here that's taking place. And it runs all the way back up to Russ and Dave and what they've done. So the two tie together quite nicely, and it's unfortunate that Russell couldn't join us here tonight. And David Miller, like you said, had been on your show before and tried to articulate this to you through the court system, but Dave wasn't being received very well. And at the time, you were pretty much up to your ears in the secret space program, divulging that information. And I think that his timing on your show was not conducive to what it was you were trying to do there. So at this point now, it's come full circle, and these guys are. They're sovereigns, and they recognize that in the United Nations. Everybody here recognizes them. Bad thing is, the military doesn't recognize it because it's such a highly guarded secret. They don't want Russell and Dave to be correct and capture everything they've captured and reconstitute on a quantum location that everybody can move to, free from the tyrannical efforts of those around us now who are trying to just use us as peasants and serfs.
Well, can you be a little more specific when you're talking about a quantum location? What exactly do you mean?
It's like any other language, French or Russian. They all have their.
Well, my understanding of quantum is quantum basically is what we're talking about is signal non-locality. That you're talking about, in essence, Schrodinger's cat, which is both alive and dead at the same time and can be in two places at the same time. What is your understanding of quantum?
That is correct. They say that, two positions can't hold the same place at the same time, but that is not correct, because when two people come together to create a life, they share that moment in the creation of that life. So 2 points can't hold the same location. And that is where the quantum vacuum begins and ends. So,
so whereabouts did they do this in terms of quantum? How did they achieve this? You said they did all of this in quantum.
well, like I said, this is something that Russell and Dave have to tackle for you, and that's why Russell was on the show tonight.
Okay.
He's the one that actually holds all of the titles for this. He actually is the individual that Dave Wynn Miller mailed him around the world. He's the only person to ever do it. Russell was considered a package, and as he landed at those locations as that package, he disclosed what it was he was doing and captured those locations. He reconstituted them in their quantum grammar and basically moved everything that's controlling this planet using the Admiralty and Maritime Laws of the Sea, that the 13 banking families are using, etc., into their construct and created their own government. And it's just sitting there waiting for everybody to join. So the fix is in place, the victory been made.
Okay, well, but one of the individuals instrumental in this, doesn't even want to show up. That doesn't bode well for if you're trying to start a movement to raise awareness of the rest of the people. You can't operate on your own. These people obviously need the people to follow them or to acknowledge and to, take some of this on board and actually act this way, talk this way, and so on and so forth. It's not looking good. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I can't apologize enough. I've tried this a couple times with you. Unfortunately, weather conditions ruined the last attempt. But I can't speak for Russell. He and Dave, they go back and forth a little bit, and apparently Russell had an issue with Anna's title. I'm not sure.
But if you're two people divided by a common language, then getting any kind of situation handled is going to be very, very difficult. I realize this isn't your fault, so to speak. I don't think it's anyone's fault, but it is sort of cautionary to the listeners, I'm afraid, under these circumstances. Can you discuss, with your knowledge of all the parties involved, how do you guys plan to proceed from here? Do you have any ideas?
Well, the object was to bring Anna in to divulge all the fraud that's taking place and who's behind the fraud and who's in control of the globe and what's taking place behind all that. And she's done a great job of divulging that. She's published it with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the FBI, the Provost Marshal, the U.S. Marshals, like I said, a host of other agencies. It's trickled down through us, and it's been my endeavor to get this into the local law enforcement eyes so that we can avert any sort of civil war or unrest that may take place due to any change of hand or changing of the guard that may take place as it's recognized. So Russ was going to further articulate what it was he's done so that he could explain what he and Dave Wynn Miller have set up. Unfortunately, he didn't show up tonight, and I apologize to everybody for that. This was a huge opportunity for him to come forward and disclose all that to you, where Dave Wynn Miller didn't quite articulate it well enough on the last show for everyone else. So at this point, Anna's working very hard to reconstitute the common law courts and alert the local authorities as to what's happening. So she's doing a great job there. So Anna, if you want to go ahead and let them know what you're doing.
Well,
this particular juncture.
Over the past 3 months, I've had at least a dozen different organizations come forward and, claim that they had somehow or another, in some way or another, established some kind of victory against what everybody has different names for: the Dark Force, the Cabal, the Illuminati, the monster under the bed. And what I know is that for many, many years, there has been a plan to basically collapse the three cities, the empire of the cities, into one globe-spanning, all-encompassing corporation, the UN Corporation, which was established prior to the United Nations Charter and is obviously not the same as the United Nations we think of. So, you know, the destruction of the inner city of London fabric, the destruction of the Washington, D.C. Corporation, the folding of the Vatican, these are things that were projected long into the future and have been in the works for a long, long time. And, you know, that's to my knowledge, that they're all drawing together under the banner of the United Nations city-state. So instead of there being 3 city-states, there would be one all-encompassing city-state, and it's obvious what that all-encompassing city-state would be. The United Nations would take over from the City of London, the District of Columbia, and the Vatican. That does appear to be what's happening.
Right, but this is not a good thing. Wouldn't you agree?
I would say that it's a very dangerous thing because it's a consolidation of power. And any time that power is consolidated, it bears with it the ability and the potential to be grossly abused.
That's correct. We've seen 3 entire tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel uprooted and snatched. There's no bloodline relation left for those 3 tribes here on this planet due to the last effort behind this entire debacle.
Okay, which 3 tribes is that?
You know, I wish I could pull those up for you. I don't have them offhand.
All right. Go ahead.
What I wanted to bring everybody's attention to is that this has happened before. What we're going through right now has happened before, and that there is a process that we all know involved where they create a problem and then they step forward with the solution for the problem and pretend to be the heroes after they've created the problem. And I think that this is exactly what we're looking at with the dissolution of the inner city of London, the dissolution of the Washington, D.C. Municipal Corporation, and the basically the folding and restructuring of the Vatican.
Okay, now that actually makes some sense because I do have a whistleblower who, Cameron Faley, who did disappear and go offline a while ago, but he was very astute when talking about the banking families and the City of London because he worked for them for, I guess, most of his life, and so does his family. But he was a whistleblower, and he did say that their plan was to do something with regard to the City of London. And what you're saying is that the reason maybe even behind Brexit might be involved in this consolidation that you're talking about.
Well, absolutely. And look at the history. In the early 1300s, what was it, 1302, the Templars disappeared from the face of the earth, taking all of their wealth with them. Where did they go? They went to Scotland. Okay. And then a few years later, in the early 1600s, well, I should say it was the late 1500s, the Dutch East India Company similarly just disappeared off the face of the earth. Now think about that. What happened? They didn't disappear. They cut a deal with the British government. The Dutch East India Company was actually far more powerful than the British East India Company. But the Dutch, for their own reasons, disappeared, just like the Templars, taking all of their wealth and power and ships with them. They just sort of vanished off the stage of world events. And now we're going through a similar process where the Dutch went to America under the British flag and reestablished all of their stuff here, just as, you know, they were permitted to do by the British government. And now we're seeing the same families, the same banking interests disappearing again. Last week they vanished. They are no longer here among us. And everybody is making all these conjectures about, oh, you know, they went home to Sirius B, or they, you know, stepped inside a time machine, or they're hiding in underground bunker cities. But I think that a more realistic investigation of the matter will show that they moved their operations to China. So this entire phenomenon has happened repeatedly about every 200 to 300 years over the course of the last 1,000 years. We've seen it in 1302, we've seen it in 1565, and we've seen it again now. And I do believe that the way it went was, it went from Jerusalem to Europe, and from mainland Europe it went to Scotland, and from Scotland it went to the Washington, D.C., and from Washington, D.C. it's now migrating again to China. It's like a parasite. And each time these vast fortunes simply disappear, they vanish. Now, how is that possible in a world which is as interconnected as our world is today? I don't think it is possible. I think that if people are watching what's going on, if they're listening, if they're thinking, they will see that these banking interests have stolen everything and are simply moving. They have exhausted one host. The jig is up. And so they're moving to a new feeding ground, which happens to be China. And if I were the Chinese people and the Chinese government, I would realize what the history of this organization and these interests are.
Except if you're part of it.
Well, to an extent, there is that. And I'm sure that they have bought their way in every step that they've taken. But if you know that you're dealing with a destructive parasite that is going to suck you dry and destitute.
Yeah, it's all being done in an effort to conquer. You need to conquer the entire planet, and that's exactly what's going on here.
Well, it's like having a tapeworm. Once you know it's a tapeworm, why would you want it? Why would you deal with it? Why wouldn't you just simply destroy it?
Well, I have a whistleblower that says the really interior governing group of China at this time are reptilians.
Well, reptilians are simply, you know, the remnants of an ancient caste system. The Aryan caste system existed on this planet at least 32,000 years ago when the last plasma war occurred. And as far as I know, what people are now calling reptilians are simply people that are the descendants of the warrior caste of that ancient society. And they were born and bred for war. So they have some specific they have certain attributes that are unusual, but that doesn't mean that they are in and of themselves evil.
Kind of like breeding a pit bull.
Well, I guess it depends how you look at that. My understanding is that they are the enemy of the human race, and that they wish to rule over the humanity, and as they've been trying to do for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, and that they're gaining quite a foothold at this time. If you're in essence saying that all the money is now going to China, it may indeed mean that that's exactly the move they're going to make.
Right. Well, they'll try to put their political power base at the UN, and they will keep their money safely socked away in China and pit the US and Russia against each other. That is, if you're looking at history and you're looking at how these people operate and you're looking at how they've done this repeatedly over known history, this is what they're up to. And we just have to, we have to be a step ahead of them, and we have to make the diplomatic efforts that will result in them finally being chased down and put out of business, because this is all about business.
Right.
The other, about the reptilians, you're talking about a military caste that does not function well without its own leadership. It's priest caste, because the priest caste always was in control of the military castes.
Right.
So they are looking, they are either under the control of priests, one way or another.
Yes, another word for priest is magician, but sure.
Right, they're either under the control of priests, or they're in over their heads and not doing well because they don't function well that way. So I think a lot of blame is being placed on the reptilians, which is undeserved. I think that there is another element there, the priest caste, that is either there or missing, which in either case is causing a problem.
Okay, well, I won't disagree with that. It's a complex game, but I appreciate, the way you're looking at it. So at this time, given what you've just described, how exactly is what you're working on going to solve anything?
Well, I think that a lot of this is caused by lack of awareness. So bringing the information forward and getting people to actually look at it is job one.
Right.
You can't deal with a problem until you actually analyze what it is. And so we know that the vast fraud has been committed against the people of this country and against people all over the world, because this is not just a United States problem. This problem is global.
That's right. That's exactly correct.
So,
and that's exactly what Russ and Dave are so paramount. It's so imperative that the information be given to the people of what it is they've done, exactly who they are and what they've done needs to be articulated. And it can only be articulated by those two gentlemen. They understand the warfare at that level, and they've conquered it. And they're the only two individuals who have the education behind them to explain it to anybody in a manner that could be well received. I can't speak for them, and I apologize to everybody if they couldn't make it on the show tonight. And trust me, the information they hold behind them and what they've done is absolutely earth-shattering. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, given that's the circumstance, at this time, I'm not sure that there is much more for us to discuss. Perhaps we should, reconvene at another time when one of those individuals wants to come forward and talk more about this, and having both of you on here at that time would be wonderful as well. Is there anything else you want to add, either one of you, while we still have a little bit of time left? And
well, I'd just like to say, if I could, Anna, before I let you close out, I'd like to say again, I want to apologize. Russ gets flustered when he has to sit here and listen to history being recounted in a way that isn't really accurate, and it's hard for him to bite his tongue. So I had a long conversation with him last night about that. And I think that just really ate away at him. He decided not to show up, and that's kind of been his MO. He just gets upset at the fact that history's been detailed to us wrong. We're being fed information wrong, and just really upsets him.
Okay, well, if he in fighting the long long war, so to speak, I think he's going to have to kind of get his emotions underhand and basically, sort of join the party. Otherwise, I don't really see him, what he's so-called accomplished, as really being able to move forward. Maybe David Miller can step in on his behalf. I don't know. I'm not so sure that resting all of this on two individuals is even boding well for the effort. But nonetheless, anything else you would like to say, Anna, about this? We do appreciate you're sharing your point of view and as well as the law, as you know, the common law, as you have obviously studied it and so on.
Well, I have a recommendation to people who are really interested and want to know about the powers and the way this works, is to read the Constitution as a commercial contract for services. Take a look at what the services are and what the federal entity is supposed to be providing for us.
Then take a look at
it as a consumer. And the other thing is a great book by Brent Winters called The Excellence of the Common Law. And I think that would answer many, many questions that people have about the origin of the common law, how it's supposed to operate, and why it's a very valuable tradition and one that we should have we should reestablish our common law courts without any further delay.
Yeah, I think that we can reconvene at another time and bring Russ and Dave back into this, Anna, because I think it's important that we articulate to the American people what's happening with Rothschild in relation to the new republic and what he's done at the United Nations to declare that there are no Americans left in the United States and we're all British subjects now. I think that's really important, and if you guys will follow the 3 international bankruptcies of the United States and where they started and where they've ended, I think that'll lead a lot of people in the right direction.
I would certainly be open to discussing all of that at some point if you can get Russell to come on.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll throw him in headlock.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. It's been very interesting, and this will go onto YouTube after we close this down, and it will be up there indefinitely, so people will be able to refer to it if they would choose to, and hopefully we can continue this discussion in the future with Russell J. Gould or with David Wynn Miller, or both of them, either way.
Yeah.
And Scott Bennett as well. Scott Bennett has texted me that he is out at a conference and unable to join us tonight, so perhaps he will be able to join us at another time. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Tomorrow night, I have Mary Rodwell. I'm going to hang up on you both, Anna and Robert, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, President Hemlock. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This has, again, been a very interesting discussion, and I hope you enjoyed it. I can say that I'll be back tomorrow night with Mary Rodwell, and we'll be talking about her new book, referring to the new human and the awakening. And she is a psychotherapist as well as counselor. She is head of an organization called ACERN, and she deals a lot with abductees, as well as counseling families of abductees, from what I understand. And we'll be discussing her new book as well as what she's been doing in the last few years in her career. She is located in Australia, and I think she was recently speaking at a conference here in the United States, but she is now going to be back in Australia. And hopefully, with the time difference being at what it is, we will be on track and have her on the show tomorrow night at 7 p.m. here on Project Camelot TV. So thanks again for watching, and have a great night. Bye.